Notice, in accordance with the new copy regulations, this episode of Quoth is intended for ages 16 and up. While some of the content we sometimes feature is kid-friendly to context, the episode is to address adults and inform them of said content from the research as consumers in service of their youth. In other words, parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, teachers, librarians, etc. There is the possibility of adult language present on the episode as well, rated TV 16 and up. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, once again to another edition of Quoth Raven, Lewis Brett Raven. I'm your host, Lewis Brett Raven, 29-year veteran writer, illustrator, and editor of science fiction, fantasy, horror, comics, and role-playing games. And tonight is Saturday Night Special because we didn't have the ability to do Friday Night Genre Talk last night. Well, we usually do because, well, for some reason the live stream wasn't working. It's working now, and our topic is my top 10 favorite science fiction authors. So without further ado, let's get into it. We'll start with number 10. As soon as I can get this silly thing working, there's something here. There we go. And that is Mr. Olaf Stapledon. He lived from May 10th, 1886 to September 6, 1950. He was known as a British philosopher and science fiction author, best known for the novels Star Maker, published in 1937, Last and First Men, a story of the far and near and far future in 1930, and Odd John, a story between jest and earnest, published in 1935. When I discovered the author, well, I was introduced to Stapledon in college via my science fiction as literature course, taught by a very interesting fellow by the last name of Burtno. He had put Last and First Men on the curriculum for the course, and the book I had to buy also had Star Maker as a double novel. Very blessed to have both stories straight away. Later on, I believe it was Chris Claremont who directed me to Odd John, and that made a lot of sense given the constructs of the story and how it coins the phrase Homo superior and how that plays into the whole mutant side of the Marvel Universe and stuff like that. But so I'd say I was around 20 years old when I discovered him. And I don't know if I would have picked up on him because he's kind of dry British writing, but because I was old enough to appreciate it, I came to enjoy his work. So why does he make my top 10? Well, here's why. Stapledon directly influenced several of the writers who I'll be naming later on the show, and I'll cite who when that time comes. I know I'm at least one. There's 3 or 4 he actually influences, though. As aforementioned, he coined the phrase Homo superior, for that later gets mentioned from mutants and other stuff like that, and other stuff. He created the ideas behind the Zeissensphere. He wrote some of the first descriptions of modern genetic engineering and terraforming as well. He did a lot of legitimate science predictions, I guess you could say, that really defined the direction of where science went in the early 1900s. And say 1900 to 1932 or something like that. My recommended works, of course, for him are Last and First Men, Odd John, and Star Maker. And I'll give you a little bit of an idea of what those books are about. Last and First Men is basically about the history of mankind from the perspective of the evolution of humanity, like hundreds and hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years in the future, as an alien species, looking back and connecting like the last men to the first men. And that telling us kind of how we evolved. It's that kind of story. Odd John is about a. It's kind of like the first Ubermensch superhuman Superman's type story. And again, it comes up with the first phrase of Homo superior in it and stuff like that. And he tries to create a utopia for super beings, and because of the political um, jealousies and other issues that come about, it falls apart, and humanity almost destroys itself because of it. Mm-hmm. And Star Maker is more about. Hold on a minute. Why is that doing that? It does this. There we go. It's more like, I don't know, how do I put this? Where Last First Men was kind of like the history of this human species over 2 billion years. Star Makers is the history of the life in the entire universe. It tackles like the Big Bang theory and talks about the relationship between creation and creator and decay and death on a universal scale. And it has a like multiple civilizations of aliens and stuff like that over the course of like I say billions and billions of years, and it's like the progressive unity between different races and civilizations and how that unity ebbs and flows, and how it when it's in unison, and when it's not in unison, how it grows and crashes, I guess you could say. And it also brings up stuff like genetic engineering, and it comes up with other thematic structures that I guess you could say one of the more imaginative, um, psychologically imaginative works in science fiction. Mm-hmm. My number 9 author is Octavia E. Butler. She lived from June 22nd, 1947 until February 24th, 2006. Known as an American science fiction author, multiple time recipient of both the Hugo and Nebula Awards, she became in 1995 the first science fiction writer to receive a MacArthur Fellowship, which is a very significant thing. Best known for her patternist novel series, the novel Kindred, the short fiction story Bloodchild, and her parable novels. When I discovered the author, again, I'll admit it was after college. When Burton put me on the right path in that college course, he couldn't introduce me to every great SF author I'd been missing out on. But when it came to my teaching science fiction as literature at a community college a few years later, myself, Bloodchild, and other stories came along my radar. And that led me to Kindred, which I included in my curriculum. Now, why did I include Butler on my list? Butler has produced a very compact but impactful narrative of social science fiction. She did not just write about fictional worlds, but she wrote about her own experience as a human, a woman, and as a Black person in society in essays, and was one of the field's more eloquent speakers on equality and the lack thereof between race, gender, sexuality, and the pecking order mentality that destroys society from within across all systems, not just racial or gender or sexuality, but even within each individual system. In other words, the pecking order between white men, it's there. The pecking order mentality between Black women is there. It's this whole, this pecking order mentality uh, is destroying humanity and society from within. Now, her death was at the all too early age of 58, um, left a major hole in our community that has yet to be fully healed, unfortunately. She was much beloved in the science fiction community, and while she was certainly greatly respected in life, the outpouring of respect that she received in her departure from this world was to me very I won't say surprising, but it was certainly um, more than I expected. Because I mean, I know she was very popular and successful, but I didn't realize she was um, that respected by everybody, and she was. It was like it was good to know that she had been that well admired and respected for her work. Um, I don't know why. There's something missing here. Whoops, pardon me. Yep, there's something missing. But anyway, it's okay. My recommended reads are Kindred, Bloodchild, and the complete Patternist series, which are Wild Seed, Mind of My Mind, Clay's Art, and Pattern Master. Uh, all these are best-selling books. As you can see, Bloodchild won the Nebula Award. All of these different books are very well. Bloodchild's actually a short fiction work. I would recommend Bloodchild first, then I would go with Kindred, and then I would go with the 4-book series. In this case, Bloodchild is a novelette that won the 85 Hugo Award, and it appeared originally in Isaac Asimov's science fiction magazine. And what it is it's about a story about a colony of humans who have a bond with a race of insect-like life forms called the Tilk. And they're on the Tilk's planet. And the Tilk realize that humans make excellent hosts for the Tilk eggs, and so they protect the humans, but in return, they require that every family choose a child for implantation, and thus every human that gets implanted with an egg is called a Natilk. And so it's about this basically the human hosting their reproduction. And so kind of it's this really kind of weird thing. And I'm not going to go into all the stuff like that, but it's a really interesting storyline because it's the imposition of, most of the time the hosts are male that have to carry the insects, and so it's like having the imposition of something that in humans is normally a female impregnation imposed on the male. What does that do to the male? That gender change. There's other gender role switches and other things like that, as well as racial, between the two different races. There's juxtapositions and inequalities between them that are explored, and it makes a very interesting storyline. I think that people should start with that one first, because that's where Butler kind of drives home her, I won't say her primary thesis, but one of her main themes in her body of work is in that story. Number 8 is Samuel R. Delany. He was born April 1st, rather, 1942, rather, and he is still living to this day. He's an American author, a retired teacher and still a literary critic. He is best known for his novels Babel 17 or Babel 17, The Einstein Intersection, Dahlgren, Stars in My Pocket Like Grains of Sand, and the memoir The Motion of Light and Water. When I discovered him, another Burton No author from that science fiction and literature course in college, Stars in My Pocket Like Grains of Sand was in that curriculum of that course. Now, I mentioned that some of the authors influenced by Stapleton. Here's one of them. Delany's recurring themes in his work are language, sexuality, memory, and perception, which Stapleton also worked in, as he would talk about how language, memory, and perceptions change between the first and last Men series. But Delany takes it to a much more refined individualistic level as well as a societal level and juxtaposes them opposite each other in his work. And Delany doesn't stop there. Delany is one of the first openly gay writers in science fiction, and he has been involved in comics, both as a storyteller and critic. He has taught at both Cornell and Temple University, among other higher educational campuses as well. And he's been a well-received literary critic and journalist for decades. So why did I put him as number 8? Stars in My Pocket was a shock in the system for me, and it's not even Delany's most provocative work, but the notion of lifting a being from sentience to from sub-level intellect to sentience back and forth between the two, and the being knows this is being done to them is just terrifying. And then to talk about that in class and juxtapose it within the social political culture of classism and racism and genocide, and show where and how Delany was presenting a parallel to this. In other words, how the Nazis were treating the Jews and pushing them to sub-level existence, that they didn't deserve to exist and were trying to not just make them subservient, but to eradicate them from Earth. To talk about how different cultures throughout history over religion or over different philosophical ideologies try to destroy each other and say their class or their people was better than others. That's what this was kind of about, and it was interesting to me because I was, like I said, I was like 19 or 20 when this was coming about, and it was not subject matter that was not a subject matter that was openly discussed in a classroom setting to me up to that point in my life. I don't know if it was just that the schools I went to hadn't found material like that to speak of. I mean, or what? I mean, there was a little bit in Civil War. Obviously we talk about Huckleberry Finn or Red Badge of Courage, but it just wasn't talked about to this kind of level. Then there was Babel 17, which I have discussed on the show in the past, and how this influenced writers like Ursula Le Guin for The Dispossessed, Embassy Town for China Melville, and Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash as well. That's another reason why he's on this list. Delany's influence as a teacher for 40 years, in addition to his writing critical works, are also as much as an influence on society as well. So that's why he made this list. My recommendations are, of course, Stars in My Pocket Like Grains of Sand, Babel 17, and his memoir, The Motion of Light in Water. You can also read Dahlgren, really any of his works. But, if you're going to start at the top, these are my top three. Our next one, number 7, of course, is Harlan Ellison. Born May 27th, 1934. He passed away June 28th, 2018. Author, screenwriter, essayist, and certified pain in the ass and curmudgeon. Best known for, well, I'm not really so sure what he's best known for. Where do you go with Harlan? City on the Edge of Forever from Star Trek, his Dangerous Visions anthology, the short fiction I Have No Mouth But I Must Scream, the short fiction Demon with a Glass Hand. I'm not really sure where we go with him. He's got so much work. Repent, Harlequins, The TikTok Man. I don't know. He's got quite a bit out there to go from. And I'm waiting for the page. When I first discovered the author, well, I knew Harlan's work well before I knew it was Harlan who had done the work. I was not a person that kept up with credits of writers on TV shows as a child. But of course, I had seen his work on Star Trek, City on the Edge of Forever, and The Outer Limits, Demon with the Glass Hand. But I think the first work that I really made the connection of who Harlan was and connection name to the work was I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, which I read when I was about 15 years old from a very beat up copy, library copy of the 1968 edition. Why does he make the list? Well, here's why. Love him or hate him, and there's plenty who feel both towards him, as he's one of science fiction's most controversial and combative personalities. Nobody can say that he didn't give us every last ounce of heart, soul, charm, wit, anger, love, and knowledge to his craft. Influential to many, and those who were able to enter his inner circle will tell you this. He is simply irreplaceable as a person. And, there's people who can learn how to write like him, but you can't replace Harlan's personality. There's something about the irascibility of him, the deliberate, not so much wanting to pick a fight, but to pick a fight just to see what happens. He's not picking a fight to be mean. He's picking a fight to see what a person's reaction is to it. It's an experiment to him. It was oh, that's what that reaction is going to be. Oh, okay, well, that's the reaction. This is my reaction. Let's see what he does now, type thing. That's kind of his. That was kind of his thing. He was never, don't get me wrong. If you really pushed his buttons, he would go off the rails and get mad as hell. But when he was pushing other people's buttons, he was not necessarily doing it out of malice. He was usually doing it, kind of like a mad scientist of sorts. My recommended reads are, of course, his Dangerous Visions anthology, which he edited, Demon with a Glass Hand, or you can watch the Outer Limits episode. This happens to be the graphic novel edition that was adapted by Marshall Rogers. There is, of course, the I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, which was also adapted into comics by John Byrne from Dark Horse. There is also, which was in the Dream Corridor storyline, Harlan Ellison's Dream Corridor comics from Dark Horse. Again, there's City on the Edge of Forever. There's Repent, Harlequins, The TikTok Man, quite a few others as well. He's influenced so many different people who have actually taken his stories and adapted them, that he's actually sued numerous individuals who have made movies based off of his ideas Um, so I don't remember the exact ones off the top of my head right now. I think there's like 3 or 4 of them that he's done that with. So um, if you go into a little history into his lawsuits, it's all there, documented online. You can learn about it. My number 6 is Ursula K. Le Guin. Born October 21st, 1929. She passed away on January 22nd, 2018. Author of over 20 novels and 100 short stories, in addition to poetry, literary criticism, translations, and children's books. Best known for her fantasy Earthsea trilogy, her science fiction body of work includes the 1970 Hugo and Nebula award-winning Left Hand of Darkness, which is not the sole reason, but this is primarily what earned her spot on this list. When I discovered the author, can you guess? A little Burton note told me. Yeah, that science fiction literature course was life-changing back in '92. Why? Here's why. Left Hand of Darkness was a combination of a dry science journal and a social science experiment where the point of view narrator didn't necessarily realize they were the subject of said experiment. Layer of context were heavy because we are talking about aliens who didn't understand gender because they didn't have that context in their culture, and how that changes perceptions of things and how they perceive humans in the story. This led me to explore other Le Guin works, notably her 1974 novel Dispossessed, which of course I just told you was influenced by our number 8 author, Delaney, who in turn was influenced by Stapleton. So, of course, Le Guin is also influenced by Stapleton. She would also herself become a major influence for some major authors, including Neil Gaiman and Salman Rushdie. My recommend reads for her are, of course, the Earthsea trilogy, if you're going to read fantasy, but in science fiction, it's The Dispossessed, The Left Hand of Darkness, and The Lathe of Heaven. I actually have that copy of that version of The Left Hand of Darkness. I love that cover. It's just wild design, and sometimes I wish they had more covers like these in books today. These classic quality painting, that just crazy imagery, but they don't seem to do that anymore these days. Our number 5 author is Jules Verne. Born February 8, 1828, he passed away on March 24th, 1905. Known for being a novelist, poet, and playwright, best known for Around the World in 80 Days, Journey to the Center of the Earth, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, The Mysterious Island, and From Earth to the Moon. When I first discovered the author, very young, I want to say around age maybe 6 or 7, maybe even younger than that. I'm not sure if it was because I was given the records that did the short audio plays of the Journey of the Center of the Earth with the Mollywood cover art, or if I saw a movie on TV based on Journey or 20,000 Leagues or something. But my mother was not someone who read little kitty stuff to me when I was little, so I was exposed to Jules Verne at a very young age. So why is he number 5? Well, here's why. Verne's one of the founding fathers of science fiction. It is also quite astounding that his work was originally heralded as worthy of academic study, and not just as on a literary level, but legitimate scientific research, until that work became so popular amongst the general population in terms of its literary pulp fiction popularity. That perception of the work changed so that could only be appreciated as that of a genre work instead of its scientific merits as well. His science for its era and how it affected the direction of where science went as well is very well documented. Unfortunately, he's often overlooked in American literature and in American science fiction. And like In literary studies, other than a direct comparison of his contemporaries, H.G. Wells and Edgar Allan Poe, because of Verne's French origins, as opposed to an individual whose direct influence in science fiction is worthy in its own right. Um, my recommended reads, of course, are From the Earth to the Moon, 20,000 Leagues into the Sea, and Journey to the Center of the Earth. But for some reason, there is something missing here, and I don't know why it's missing, and I'm a little bit annoyed here. Let me see what's going on here. Aha, that's why. Because it's in the wrong place. Okay, that makes sense. That's what happens when I do things in the middle of the night. All right, no problem. I was looking for my artwork with Wally Wood and the records. When we get to someone else later on, I'll identify and correct what my graphics have misplaced. Okay, so let's go ahead and go on to our next one. Um, our number 4 creator, number 4 author is Isaac Asimov. Born January 2nd of 1920, he passed away April 6, 1992. Known for being a writer and professor of biochemistry, his best-known works are the Foundation series and the I, Robot / Robotic stories. When I first discovered the author was 1987. The book was the novelization of Fantastic Voyage, re-release of Fantastic Voyage 2, Destination Brain. I had seen the movie and wanted to read the novel. This would later lead me to the Robot series and ultimately the Foundation series. So why is Asimov number 4? Well, mostly it's the robot books. I've always felt like he understood robotics and the influence his stories have had on the science of robotics and what stories we tell about robotics, from Data and the Borg on Star Trek to the movie AI to the film adaptations of Asimov's own stories, I, Robot and Bicentennial Man. It's very much not only spurred humanity's imagination of what we can do with technology and perhaps a new form of life in robotics, but the exploration of humanity and a lack of understanding of ourselves that tells us whether we should be holding back on that technology until we do have an understanding of what humanity and our own, I guess, for lack of a better word, a soul is. Because if we don't understand ourselves, we can build, you can build a physical form, a physical body, but what do you fill it with, so to speak? Artificial intelligence, what makes it, what gives it life, all that stuff. So he talks about all that stuff philosophically, and he did that in a way that nobody else did before. Yeah. Of course, my recommended reads for him are The Positronic Man, which of course is how Data and similar characters, which is also released as the film Bicentennial Man with Robin Williams. That's based on. The Caves of Steel is a Robot series, and I, Robot, of course, is in there as well. Those are my 3 top picks, but you could also definitely go with the Foundation series as well. Number 3, Arthur C. Clarke. December 16th, 1917, he was born. He passed away on March 19th, 2008. Best known as a writer, inventor, and futurist, his best known works are Childhood's End, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Rendezvous with Rama, and The Fountains of Paradise. When I discovered the author, I discovered Clarke through Kubrick's 2001: Space Odyssey movie in 1982 at the age of 10. Basically, I went to the library and checked out the book to try and better understand what I just watched. Clarke, like Asimov, wasn't just influential in a literary sense of the sciences. He was a practical scientist rather, who affected the very fabric of our existence. He has accurately predicted many advancements, including satellites and cell phones. In fact, he basically wrote about much of the technology that was actually later created to create uh, synchronous orbit being satellites, cell phones. He talked about internet. He talked about online banking and online shopping, explaining many of these processes in layman terms of how that process would happen or how it might happen. And he wrote about this stuff originally far back as 60 years ago. So if he wasn't influencing the imaginations of where our science was headed, then who was? I mean, I really believe that his writing and his essays and his speeches, he would go and do public speaking. He would appear on television and talk as a guest on television shows, really made people take notice. And I think he had a uh, much greater influence than people realize. My recommended reads, of course, Art Odyssey Trilogy, Space 2001, 2010, 2061, Rendezvous with Rama as well. There's, of course, plenty of other stuff with Clark that you can pick as well. Now, our number 2 author is going to be a little bit of a mixed up thing because I got a lot of stuff in here that got screwed up. um, so let me see if I can get that fixed real quick, if you don't mind, while we're talking. I'm going to try and add an image to the show if I can. Come on. Okay. All right. There we go. Hopefully that'll work. I don't know. Or maybe I should try and rename it something else. Yes, that's right. That's better. Now I can add it. Sorry, boys, girls. Let me get this added in here real quick. Oh dear. Of course, it doesn't want to add it in right. So I got to rename it again. There we go. All right. Now we can move forward. Our number 2 author is H.G. Wells, born September 21st, 1866. He passed away August 13th, 1946. He was a novelist, teacher, historian, and journalist, best known for The Time Machine, Invisible Man, War of the Worlds, Island of Dr. Moreau, The First Men in the Moon, The Shaper of Things to Come, and When the Sleeper Wakes. Those are just his novels. He also wrote numerous works in nonfiction as well that had major effect on science. When I discovered the author, obviously, um, I kind of got things screwed up here a little bit. Whoops. Go back. Um, Journey to the Center of the Earth is Jules Verne, and I didn't mean that. Again, like Jules Verne, I discovered Wells through audio stories when I was a child, specifically the adaptations of The Time Machine, not Journey to the Center of the Earth. That is um, Verne. War of the Worlds is Wells, and First Man on the Moon on record. This would also coincidentally be my first exposure to the art of the amazing Wally Wood, coincidentally, and that's how, because all those covers are by Wally Wood, Journey, First Man on the Moon, and War of the Worlds are Wally Wood art. That's how that all kind of got mixed up there. But um, as a result, I kind of missed my Time Machine cover there. That's where I kind of got messed up. But that's how I was like, what happened to my time? What happened to my Journey to the Center of the Earth cover? I'm looking for that. But that's where our mess up got in. But there's the Time Machine cover. It's not a very good cover, particularly. I never really did like this cover, but that is the cover to the album I had when I was a kid. We're talking like 4 to 6 years old. So why H.G. Wells for number 2? While Wells' structure and ideology of science fiction shaped the course of the genre from its very beginnings and still holds strong at the core of its foundations. His philosophy that a science fiction story should contain only a single extraordinary assumption so that the writer can employ the scientific theory and employ scientific ideas and theories to explain that extraordinary or impossible one element was one of the rules of science fiction writing for decades, even after his passing. It was, and while he wasn't necessarily the one who coined it, it was actually Poe who coined it before him. He was the one that really emphasized it early on in the genre. Wells was also a futurist. Much like Clarke, he was able to predict many things that would happen in society, both socially and in technological advances, including describing the first nuclear weapon in The World Set Free, written in 1914, and writing numerous novels about how the world could reach a utopian culture, but that it would go through world wars first, writing these between 1900 and 1911, well before World War I or II. He talks about the end of German militarism, moral restrictions declining as sexual freedom for both genders are expanded, the creation of the European Union, all done literally decades before, in like 1901, 1902. You know, all these things happened. The sexual revolution didn't really happen until what, 60s, 70s. You know, German militarism didn't happen really. We kind of, had to shut it down after we defeated them in World War II. The European Union just is almost that's really happened in the last 30 years. So, he's been talking about stuff, literally 100 years early, 60 to 100 years earlier. And we're sitting here reading. So clearly he had a level of insight that was unique and rare and significantly impactful, not only as a science fiction writer, but as a journalist and essayist. And he legitimately influenced politicians such as Winston Churchill. He influenced the scientific community so much that an impact crater on Mars is named after him, and so many writers that, frankly, there would not be a genre of science fiction without him. Recommended reads, in addition to earlier works I cited that he's known for as a fiction writer, I think you should read Anticipations on the reaction of the mechanical and scientific progress upon human life and thought. It's just look up Anticipations, H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells is A Short History of the World and The Outline of History, which is the whole story of man. Those are not the same book. One is about the evolution of man, and one is about evolution of the world. So both of those are very, all three of those are very science based. And even though they were written, many years ago, they still, even to this day, hold scientific plausibility and merit to a degree that is really quite astonishing, given how much more advanced and knowledgeable we've become in science. What all we've learned over the decades. But yet he has so much right in his predictive knowledge that it's quite amazing that you almost can't not look at him as, basically the father of science fiction as a result. In a way, that puts him at number 2. So if he's number 2, who could I possibly have number 1? Well, some people haul around with this, and I know if he was alive still, he'd probably argue with me on this because he doesn't see himself as a science fiction author. But my choice for number 1 is the legendary Ray Bradbury. Born August 22nd, he passed away June 5th, 2012. He was a novelist, essayist, short fiction author, screenwriter, and comic writer, best known for Fahrenheit 451, The Martian Chronicles, Something Wicked This Way Comes, The Illustrated Man, The Halloween Tree, A Sound of Thunder, Death is a Lonely Business, and God knows, hundreds and hundreds of other things. When I first discovered the author, to tell the truth, I can't remember. It seems like Bradbury has been here since my birth, even though he's been around since before I was born, but it's like I cannot remember a time I did not know about Bradbury. But that's obviously not true. But my best guess is the Martian Chronicles TV miniseries from 1980, when I was 8 years old, is what first introduced me to his work. So why is he number 1? Seriously? Are you surprised that Bradbury is my number 1 pick? Come on now. Think about how often Bradbury and how has come up in my talks on this show, and how often John Norris and I have talked about Ray Bradbury films or stories on this show over the past 3 years. Bradbury is clearly the guy who picked up where Vernon Wells had left off, but he brought science fiction into a sense of realism and philosophical fiction from modern times. Where while Wells was thinking of the technological horrors and of nuclear weapons, Bradbury predicted the nature of censorship and the eradication of history books and history via books in Fahrenheit 451, which he considers his only real science fiction book. Now, like I said, Bradbury himself would reject my placing him here because he never called himself a science fiction author. He considered himself a fantasy author or a realist, a fantasy realist or something like that. But to him, Fahrenheit was his only science fiction book. Everything else he wrote was fantasy, and I can see where he's coming from, but he wrote in a Wellesian style, in that he always kept it to one thing that was fantastical and then tried to make that explainable. But where he's truly a science fiction writer is in his exploration of culture and society. He is quite meticulous in his research and presentation, whether it's symbolic nature in the Martian Chronicles, or it's a reinvention of his birthplace of Waukegan, Illinois, in his Greentown stories, or the examination of how society loses its ability to think for itself and gets conditioned to mass media in Fahrenheit 451. The recommended reads, well, did Ray Bradbury write it? Then you read it. That's my recommendation on Ray Bradbury. But if I have to give you a few selections, if this thing will hurry up and pick them, obviously we're going to pick Fahrenheit 451. We're going to pick the Martian Chronicles. The Halloween Tree for kids, I think, is a good choice. The October Country is a good choice as well. Those are short stories. Those two particular versions of those books are illustrated by Joseph Magnani, and they're beautifully illustrated books if you can get those particular editions. You probably can't; they're out of print. But if you can find them uh, at a library or something just to look at, I highly recommend it. I also recommend getting the cover of the version of this paperback of Fahrenheit 451. Um, it's a really cool cover. I love that cover. This is the cover that I discovered Fahrenheit with. This is, I believe, the cover of Martian Chronicles that I first saw. And I was always kind of confused by it because I was like, this isn't Mars. This has got clouds and water and everything. Yeah, yeah. But of course, when you think about it, then my first exposure was the Martian Chronicles TV show, so our TV miniseries from NBC in '80s. So it was a little bit weird for me, but and how influential is Ray Bradbury in that sense? Well, I think without Ray Bradbury, you wouldn't have Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars trilogy. I don't think you would have Philip K. Dick's Total Recall, where they have the story. We can remember it for you wholesale, or whatever. Where the storyline is about where you can they create the Martian recreate the Martian atmosphere in that movie and that story. A lot of the things that are done there um, with Mars and our interest in Mars um, with the Martian Chronicles might not be there. Um, Not that he wasn't interested in Mars himself, from what NASA and everything else being done with Mars at the time. There was certainly interest in Mars prior to Bradbury, but I think, again, as I said, Bradbury modernized our society's interest in science fiction and in science. So that's my number one. Those are my top 10. And I know that are kind of a gimme in a way. I don't know if there was any surprises in there or not. Um, Not a whole lot of more modern guys or gals per se. Um, Down the road, I'll pick some more of the more modern ones that are up and coming that I like. That I think will someday be legends like those people are. And maybe we'll talk about some other legends I've skipped out on. Uh, Nobody's really watching this episode for whatever reason. Maybe because it's just Saturday night instead of Friday night. Everybody's out partying or doing whatever they're doing. But it is what it is. And so I guess what we'll do is tomorrow around noon, not around noon, at noon, we'll come back with part two of our live draw for the weekend. And we'll come back and finish penciling and inking this bad boy. That is Creature of the Black Lagoon. And then on Monday, we will do our reviews for the week. So I will definitely appreciate you guys checking in back then. In the meantime, if you want to reach me, Facebook, Lewis.BrightRaven, on Twitter at LewisBrightRave2, on DeviantArt at DeviantArt.com/BrightRaven. You're watching Quoth Raven, Lewis BrightRaven on YouTube. You ask questions or you want to mention who your favorite science fiction authors are or something like that, hit me up at QuothRavenLBR72 at gmail.com. If I don't answer, try LewisBrightRaven at yahoo.com. As I said, tomorrow at noon, we'll do the part two of the Creature of the Black Lagoon illustration. Monday will be our comic news and reviews. Wednesday will be what do I get this week upcoming. Thursdays will be our roundtable talk discussion. I don't know who my guest or topic will be next week yet. Next week, Friday at 9 p.m., will be genre night. We'll be talking about our favorite special effects makeup artists, and I don't know who all I'm going to get yet. I've asked one person if they're interested. I'm hoping to get them. I'm going to ask 3 or 4 other people. I'm hoping to get a round table on Friday next week to talk about that stuff. So we'll see. Hopefully, if we can get a group of guys to come in and talk in about their favorite special effects makeup artists. Okay, that'll be next week. So until then, I'll see you guys next time. Have a good weekend, and I'll see you guys tomorrow at noon.